My name's Jonathan Butler. I'm a barrister who practices from Dean's Court Chambers in Manchester, and I'm also a tribunal judge in the First Tier Tribunal. That's the tribunal that deals with those who are detained under the Mental Health Act 1983. The book which I've written, called Mental Health Tribunals, Law, Practice and Procedure, originally I decided to write because at the time it was published there was no other textbook available on the market which I felt clearly explained the procedure by which those who are detained under the Mental Health Act can come before a tribunal, and the procedure by which they can be either discharged by the tribunal or their applications are rejected. And it's my view, both as a practitioner and also as a judge, that the area of law which concerns itself with the detention of individuals should be clear, and unfortunately it often isn't. So I wanted to bring clarity perhaps where there was some degree of over-complexity. And I wrote the book not just for lawyers to be involved, but also for social workers, also for healthcare professionals, and also for patients if necessary. And I believe from some of the feedback I've received on this book that it's achieved its objective. It explains the law and the procedure clearly. The contents of the book itself, there's a little bit of time spent explaining the origins of the First Tier Tribunal, or Mental Health Review Tribunal as it used to be called. It explains the functions of the individual members of the First Tier Tribunal, that's the judge as they're now called, the medical member and the specialist lay member. It gives a description of the procedural overview of the First Tier Tribunal, what tends to happen before an application gets to the tribunal. It considers something which has become particularly important and will become more important, I suspect, as time goes on, which is the interaction between the Mental Health Act 1983 and the Mental Capacity Act 2005. And the Mental Capacity Act 2005, of course, providing detention, but in different circumstances. It then considers those patients who are normally described as non-offender patients, so that's those who are detained under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, Section 3 of the Mental Health Act, and then the slightly different regime, that is Section 7 of the Mental Health Act, guardianship and community treatment orders. It considers the role of the responsible clinician, it considers the role of the approved mental health practitioner, the role of the nearest relative, and then it moves on to consider a development which has become of more importance in 2007, and that is the remedies which are available on appeal to what is the upper tribunal, and it goes through the different rules and some of the case law in respect of that. There's also a chapter which is, as far as I know, unique. That is the law which relates to children and adolescents, because of course there is no lower age limit for detention under the Mental Health Act 1983, and there is an overlap between some of the legislation and under the Mental Health Act 1983 and Community Care Law legislation and Children Act legislation. Then moves on to consider offender patients in much the same way as I consider non-offender patients, that is, it goes through the relevant sections of the statute and considers the law and procedure in relation to that. There is a section on victims' rights as well, that is for the that only applies, of course, where a tribunal is considering those who've been disposed of by way of an order of the Crown Court, for example. And it also contains all the relevant parts of the Mental Health Act 1983 Code of Practice, the relevant practice directions for the First Tier Tribunal, relevant sections of the Tribunals, Courts and Enforcement Act 2007, and the rules for both the First Tier Tribunal and the Upper Tribunal, and of course, last but not least, the relevant sections of the Mental Health Act 1983. So the overall idea is to have between two covers everything that anyone would need to represent a patient at a tribunal or for any other professional who's engaged in work before the First Tier Tribunal.